Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. As the sun set in Syria on Monday, another ceasefire aimed at ending the country's bloodshed came into effect. The deal brokered by Russia and the United States has been described by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry as possibly the last chance to save a united Syria. Will this become a pivotal time for the 5-year-old Syrian civil war? With unenforceable provisions, skepticism about its effectiveness runs deep. How long will the ceasefire last? And while the U.S. supports the alliance of rebel groups, Russia supports Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, so will there be yet another proxy war? To talk about these issues and more, I'm joined in the studio by Mr. Tao Zhao, a senior research fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Rick Dunham, former White House correspondent for Business Week. But before we get started, let's look at this.
Unlikely scenes. Calm on the front line here in Jobar district, where a cutthroat battle has been raging for years as rebels try to push towards the Syrian capital and the Syrian army tries to stop them. The much-anticipated ceasefire that many hoped would be a turning point in the Syrian conflict could mean the difference between life and death here.
I certainly hope for an end for all of this. But for now, we don't know if the truce will work or fail. But we will be ready either way. Personally, I would prefer the fighting to stop long enough for me to go see my family.
Less than a kilometer away, on the streets of Damascus, people are celebrating Eid al-Adha. The week-long holiday has created a relaxed mood in the capital, although the prospects of peace have created mixed response.
The agreement will be implemented throughout Syria, and we want peace to prevail permanently and not just for a couple of days when the war restarts the next day.
This is a good gesture and should lead to a reconciliation to end the bloodshed in Syria and try to rebuild the country.
A nationwide ceasefire has been attempted several times in Syria before, with limited success. Experts are doubtful whether this time will be any different.
Many attempts were made to establish a ceasefire, but this time it is a joint American-Russian effort. I don't know if both trust each other enough to uphold the deal. Also, we have to remember that the major fighting force for the rebels is made of radical militants who won't agree to such a deal. For them, this is an ideological struggle, and trying to impose such an agreement could in fact break the strongest of rebel factions in the country.
But if the deal fails, it remains to be seen how much more destruction and fighting the country can bear before falling apart completely. With over 500,000 dead, millions displaced, and tens of thousands of foreign jihadists roaming the country, the outlook is not promising.
Welcome back. Are you guys optimistic about the resilience of this ceasefire?
In one word, no. There have been a lot of ceasefires. There have been a lot of announcements. There have been agreements between the United States and Russia before. No ceasefire has lasted more than a few days. In most cases, it's been the Syrian government that has gone in. In this case, the biggest problem I see is that the rebel groups have not really bought into it. We may have quiet for a short time, but I don't see long-term it holding.
And your take?
Well, it's difficult to say whether optimistic or pessimistic because the situation is so complicated, and as Dick just suggested, there's a lot of ceasefires before. But this time, of course, things are a little bit different. It's after so many negotiations between Russia and the United States to conclude that agreement, and the U.S. would ask the rebels to separate from the jihadists, from mild rebels, separate from those extremists, and Russia will ask Assad to stop launching attacks on the opposition, and if ceasefire can last for a week, and the U.S. and Russia will cooperate in information sharing and in launching joint attack on jihadists. So I think the plan is pretty good, but of course it's very difficult to say, and especially the government, Assad now is in a stronger position than before, and he vowed that he would take back every part of the country from jihadists. So that means he is determined to crush down the rebels. So it's very hard to say.
The United States and Russia, of course, play a dominant role in brokering the ceasefire. But behind the two giants, I'm afraid, are lurking other major players such as Turkey and Saudi Arabia, Iran, which take sides with Russians in supporting President al-Assad. Now, during this hiatus or the ceasefire, what's the chance for International Red Cross to provide humanitarian relief so that the ill, the wounded could be saved and protected?
I think there's a very good chance of that. There's a holiday coming on, and unless I don't believe the Syrian government will violate the ceasefire first. The question is whether the jihadists, the ISIS elements, and some of the other radicals will try to trigger a collapse of the ceasefire. I think this is a very good time for the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, others to come in, and Bashar al-Assad has bombed civilian populations, and there's desperate need in Aleppo and some other areas of aid.
Is it too simple to describe the bombing of civilians as just a deliberate attempt, because the rebel groups have been able to hide themselves among the civilians using the human shield to protect themselves? So it's always a little bit dangerous and risky to say either side would just bomb the other indiscriminately. What do you think of the tricky situation?
Yeah, this is really a very complicated and tricky situation, and Russia supported Assad, and Russia launched attacks on jihadists, but also on oppositions. But opposition and jihadists sometimes are mixed together with the civilians. So that is a very difficult situation.
Mm-hmm. Then, when we call the civil strife in Syria a proxy war, at the same time, we are also talking about a war that's spinning out of control. Does it mean that the Russians and Americans have actually lost their grip on the development in the battlefield?
I don't think they've completely lost the grip. One problem is it's not one proxy war. It's about 6 proxy wars going on at once. The United States and Russia do have a common interest to try to bring stability to Syria. The problem is their end game is different. With the United States, it's replacing Bashar al-Assad. With Russia, it is to have a friend in power, and right now Bashar al-Assad is their person. I think that's the complicating factor.
Mr. Tao, Secretary John Kerry said this is perhaps the last chance to save a united Syria. Now, I pay particular attention to the use of united, without mentioning the absolute and unconditional departure of President Assad from office this time around. Does it mean that the American government is ready to make a serious compromise?
Well, I think that John Kerry, why he used the last chance? Because this is the last chance for the Obama administration to be involved in the Syrian conflict.
Are you talking about the legacy game for President Obama?
Exactly, yeah. And, because as the civil war broke out in 2011, Obama said Assad must resign, Assad must go. But Assad is still there. Yeah.
What about the issue of credibility for President Obama? Because he said nobody should ever use chemical weapons. But when President Assad was indeed accused of using chemical weapons, killing innocent people, August 21st, a few years back, on the city proper of Damascus, nothing happened. The Americans didn't step in militarily. What about the credibility of American leadership in the Middle East?
There have been several red lines that have been crossed here. I was actually in the White House in the cabinet room the day after Labor Day in 2013, when President Obama met with the U.S. congressional leaders saying he was going to bomb Syria. And then later that week, you had the British saying no, 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 and Obama backed down. So that was the first red line. The second was the chemical weapons that you discuss. That's history. There's nothing he can do about it. Right now, he's trying to salvage as much as he can. He and the Russians both have a lot at stake because of the US presidential election. Obama will be out of power, and Putin is running the risk of having an enemy in the White House, a true enemy, and if Hillary Clinton is elected, after all Putin has done to try to get Donald Trump elected.
Yeah, I think one of Obama's consideration is that he tried very hard to avoid to be involved in another grand war in the Middle East. So even his Secretary of Defense suggested several times, and even John Kerry suggested to send grand troops to Syria, but he rejected. And he said once again, we will not send grand troops to the Middle East, to Syria. And he only sent 50 American soldiers to Syria, but of course plus air attack.
Without boots on the ground, what's the chance of winning the civil strife on the American side?
The American side, almost none.
What's the point of maintaining your military presence there?
The reason the United States is militarily involved is to degrade or eliminate ISIS, the Islamic State, to take away all of their territory, to limit their chances to attack. That's just about the only military effectiveness the U.S. can have.
China and Russia will join hand in conducting naval drills in the South China Sea. It means the two permanent members of the UN Security Council are ready to exercise veto and say no to the US-led alliance on many occasions in the Middle East. That surely angered Susan Rice, the then ambassador of the United States to the United Nations. So when we look at the future of Syria, do you think President Putin has been very serious about fighting the ISIL or in maintaining the position of President Assad? What is the real purpose of the Russian troops there?
I think both. We know that in a few years ago, Russia annexed Crimea, and Europe and the United States imposed a very strict economic sanction on Russia. Although there's some diplomatic maneuvers, but the relationship between EU and Russia is still very bad. Then Putin discovered another front, that is East Front, that is Middle East, and he has seen the United States withdrawing from Middle East with its rebalanced strategy to the Asia and the Pacific, and then Putin supported Assad and improved relations with Turkey, with Iran, with all Shia Muslim. Yeah. And then we see that Putin strengthened his foothold in the Middle East. So that means that he has a kind of position to negotiate with the United States here. The United States is weaker, Russia is stronger.
Okay, that's my immediate next question. Rick, what do you think of the alleged success of Putin's diplomacy? Now, he is actually surrounded by three fronts. To his west is the European Union that joined the United States in imposing economic sanctions following takeover or annexation of Crimea. Now, the southern front, as Mr. Tawendao mentioned, is the Middle East, where he sent in the warplanes to help bomb the terrorist strongholds. To the east is China. Now, President Putin has met with the Chinese counterpart many times, and they were talking loudly about the joint or collaboration between the Euro-Asian Economic Union and the Belt and Road Initiative through the Central Asia and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Therefore, on two fronts, Putin prevailed. One is Middle East, the other Eastern Front, to supply China with energy, oil, gas. And recently, the economic forum was held in Vladivostok that rallied President Ko King-hui and the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe there to talk about their joint future. So what do you think of this embarrassment for President Obama?
I wouldn't call it an embarrassment for President Obama.
Or do you call it a blow?
No, I would. I mean,
you wouldn't call it debilitating.
I would say he is more absent than being defeated in this. But I argue with the premise a little bit. I think that Putin has not been successful as a diplomat. He has been as far as China is concerned, but he has been successful militarily. He was successful in taking Crimea. He was successful in invading eastern Ukraine. He's been very successful in Syria and the Middle East. I mean, there are Russian troops there, but I would say that Putin is not interested in Assad. His bet is not on Assad. His bet is on an ally in Syria. Assad is that ally now. Long term, he doesn't want another Afghanistan. He doesn't want Russia there for 15 years and then leaving a country that collapses. But I take your point about Obama and China, Obama and East Asia. The United States has been absent as a lot has happened in East Asia, and Obama is really caught up with congressional battles even on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So he's really on the defensive. In North Korea, he's on the defensive. With China, he's on the defensive. So it's that part is very difficult. But I wouldn't give Putin credit for that.
Well, you've made some good points, but it doesn't come as a surprise that the Americans refuse to credit Putin with diplomatic success. But don't you think diplomacy, or good diplomacy, is the culmination of a military campaign, taking Middle East as an example? But we'll come back to examine this and perhaps the U.S. election in relationship with this. You are watching Dialogue with Rick Dunham and Tao Wen-Zhao. We're discussing the latest development in the Middle East, particularly the week-long ceasefire that was reached in Geneva between Russia and the United States. We'll be back and discuss issues perhaps related to the U.S. election at this moment, after Hillary fell ill seriously. We'll be back. Welcome back. After all, the United States seemed to have agreed to work with Russia despite the economic sanctions against Moscow after the Crimean crisis and the crisis in Ukraine. So what do you think of the worst case scenario should this week-long truce fail?
The worst case scenario is civil war continues and either Assad ultimately wins, prevails, which for a lot of people would not be the worst case scenario, but that would be one result. The other is disintegration. You have, or a division of Syria, where Assad controls the area around Damascus and Aleppo, and then the eastern part of Syria, the part near Iraq, sort of becomes a de facto new country, where who knows who's in charge.
With the Kurds vowing to set up their own homeland.
Right. But I think the second choice is almost impossible. Yeah. Because first, Assad does not like the disintegration, and the second one, internationally, people do not agree with disintegration. As John Kerry just said, this is the last chance for united Syria. So United States does not.
Excuse me, gentlemen, excuse me, are you saying both that the united Syria will serve the best interest of Russia and the United States?
I would say yes, but there is a difference between the United States and Russia who should govern Syria.
Yeah,
definitely Saudi Arabia would not see this to happen.
Well, no, I think all those big countries respect the territorial integrity of Syria. Right. Yeah, both the United States, Russia, and China.
But don't you think Syria has actually become a battleground for Saudis and Iranians, for Shiites and Sunnis? This is actually very much like...
They're secondary players.
That's one of the 6 proxy wars.
No, I can't laugh. I can hardly laugh because this is indeed a tragedy that has left 11 million people homeless and over 200,000 people killed, many of them civilians and kids. Let's look at the American campaign. American presidential elections have an impact that goes far beyond the U.S. borders. What are the main issues that may have global political implications?
Well, to me, the biggest one with political implications is what Donald Trump would do beyond the U.S. borders. He's running America first. He's running that he would have trade wars with China, trade wars with Europe. He might pull out of NATO, which would destabilize Europe. He's saying that South Korea and Japan should develop their own nuclear weapons. I mean, that's, to me, what the world needs to consider is how they would deal with a President Trump who does what candidate Trump is saying. And so there are big stakes, but it's hard to plan in advance for what would happen. It's hard for countries to have a war game for what would happen if an unstable person became President of the United States. It hasn't happened before.
Well, Rick says so as if Donald Trump will be the last winner, and he will smile and laugh towards the end of his journey. Does it mean that Hillary Clinton will drop out of the race because of the illness?
Oh no, I think this time the general election is really very difficult to predict because both candidates are not that satisfactory to the voters. You know, people do not like either Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump. But as Dick just mentioned, Trump said a lot of things like his the possible relationship with Japan and Korea. But I read the Republican platform and also many speeches by his advisors. They said, for instance, U.S.-Japan alliance, that is a bipartisan policy. In the United States after the end of the Cold War. So we will not turn back to Japan. So even Trump said that, you know, but I don't think that will really going to happen.
And as far as Hillary Clinton is concerned, I assume she is healthy, assume she would continue and win. It's largely a continuation of the Obama policies, no radical shift. She is tougher on China. She is more critical on China. She is more of an interventionist, but no radical difference in policy.
This campaign promises to be one of the closest races in U.S. history, following the one between Al Gore and Bush. Well, do you believe Hillary is able to survive the 4-year terms, given her poor health?
Well, I think we're speculating about the health. We don't know what it is, but the fact is we have the two oldest candidates in combined age in American history running for president.
Hillary Clinton is 68 and Donald Trump 70.
70. And only Ronald Reagan, who was 70 when he was sworn in, would be older than Hillary Clinton at the beginning of a first term. So age is a concern. Having a vice president who is strong and smart and plugged in becomes essential. I think for both candidates, they're fortunate that they chose well for vice president. Their vice presidential nominees are both well respected in Washington, even if people disagree with some of them politically.
Rick, you have followed the race very closely and certainly an expert about the presidential election. But tell me, who will be the immediate candidate should Hillary pull out of the race?
Well, to enter the world of speculation, I don't think it will happen, but Joe Biden would be the most likely.
Many people are talking about Joe Biden should be the immediate replacement.
Right.
Why?
Well, he's vice president.
He's vice president.
He's popular. He could win.
And he's healthy, by the way.
And he's older. He's older.
Yeah.
He's older than both of them. But yeah, he is healthy. I mean, but the main thing is Democrats would want to win. The Democratic National Committee would choose a replacement. He would be way ahead of Trump. Tim Kaine is the other, her vice presidential candidate, but he's not very well known nationally, although he's respected. So I think you might see Biden and Kaine, but we're really engaging in speculation going this way.
A very experienced expert on American politics, Mr. Tao Wen-Zhao. We first invited you to come here and address the issue of American campaign. Why do you think Donald Trump has risen so quickly, despite his controversial allegations about banning Muslims from entering the border or setting up a war between Mexico and the United States? Is he a very radical nationalist?
Oh, well, I think there's a division or a split in the U.S. society. That is a split between the grassroots voters and also elites. You know, we have discovered all the elites support Hillary Clinton, then the grassroots voters support Trump. Even elites from the Republican parties, like George W. Bush family and many Romney, yes, and Bob Zoellick and Negroponte, they do not support Trump. So this is a kind of things we have not yet seen in the U.S. history, So this time, I think it's really very difficult to predict who will win the election.
Rick, do you think democracy has gone wrong in the United States, at least for this period of time?
I say this is the dangers of democracy. This is pure democracy, and it's true, we are having an elite versus a populist realignment. Bernie Sanders was the populist against Hillary Clinton. He did very well. He lost, but he did very well. Trump has the support of about half of the Republican Party, but that was enough for him to get the nomination. Both parties are split between populists and pro-business people, between nationalists and internationalists, between people who believe in diversity and people who say, America first, get rid of the foreigners.
Many that I talk to believe Hillary will survive, will be the winner. But which is her Achilles heel? The email scandal or the poor health?
Well, I think, email scandal and also Clinton Foundation are a problem for Hillary Clinton. If this happened before, for instance, in 2008 or 2004, I think Hillary Clinton would have no chance. But this time, because of the split, as we have just discussed, and because of a lot of people really cannot stand Donald Trump, so he is still there, and the elites still support Hillary Clinton. So if Hillary Clinton does not have a health problem, and we will see that in the following few days, and I think Hillary Clinton, can really to get a kind of a voter, because according to some polls, he is still
ahead of
Donald Trump for 5%.
And Hillary Clinton is the most unpopular presidential candidate in American history, except for Donald Trump. They both have Achilles heels, so one of them has to live. Donald Trump's is that an overwhelming majority of Americans do not think he is qualified to be president. Forget the lying, forget the outrageous statements, it's the qualification. With Hillary, a majority of people do not believe she is honest enough to be president. And so that's the choice. Do you want someone who you believe is dishonest or someone you believe is unqualified and dangerous? One of them is going to win.
Thank you very much. We'll certainly hold more discussions about the U.S. campaign.
In a week, there will be first presidential debate.
Thank you very much for mentioning and reminding us of this presidential debate. Until next time, goodbye.